Good Choices, a holistic conversation about dance, art, and life with Sabine Parzer. Hello, everybody. I'm Sabine Parzer. I'm very happy to host another episode of Good Choices, a holistic conversation about dance, art, and life. My guest today is Anya Cloud. Anya is a dancer, a maker, a teacher, an activist, and a collaborator. She's committed to social, justice-oriented experimental dance through a queer, feminist, and anti-racist perspective. Anya is originally from Alaska. She currently lives in Colorado, in Boulder, because she teaches there at the University of Colorado. She has been teaching for 9 years at California State University in San Marcos. Anya is one of the most amazing dancers that I've ever seen, and I've had the pleasure to both collaborate, dance, and improvise with. She is nationally and internationally active, both as a teacher and as a performer. Too many festivals and institutions to list here. She holds an MFA in dance theater from the University of California in San Diego. She holds a BA in dance and a BA in liberal studies from the University of Montana. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, everybody. This is Sabine Parzer. This is the podcast series Good Choices, a holistic conversation about dance, art, and life. I'm very happy to meet today with Anya Cloud. She's a dear friend and a lovely collaborator. I have a lot of different descriptions about Anya. I'm going to make it short. Anya is a dancer, a maker, a teacher, an activist, and a collaborator. She holds an MFA in dance theater from University of California in San Diego. She has a Bachelor's of Arts in Dance and a Bachelor's of Arts in Liberal Studies from University of Montana. Anya has been one of the most amazing dancers that I've ever met. I can truly say that. I'm in awe of you as a person and in awe of you, of your artistry. She has performed at numerous international dance festivals and taught there as well. Too many to name here. I think you really have to look at the list on her bio. Anya is committed to social justice-oriented experimental dance, and that's actually something that I would very much like to talk to you about, Anya. You also have a Feldenkrais certification, and so you're also a somatic teacher. And you write that you view yourself as an artist through a queer, feminist, and anti-racist perspective. So I think we will have many things to talk about. First of all, hi. I'm loving that I get to see you here.
Hi, Sabine. Such a pleasure to be in with you.
So, do you remember when we first met? Because I remember it. I remember first meeting you, but I wonder if it's the same time as you remember meeting me.
Yeah, I wonder too.
Well, I can... I'll share you my memory. In my memory, it's a clear memory because it was in Ibiza, the Ibiza Contact Festival. And I remember arriving a bit early. I was there to teach an intensive, and I remember arriving a few days earlier, where the contemporary and performance part, there was a separate week before it was still happening. And I remember you and Johan Nielsen putting on this most amazing show. I think it was like a 4, 5, or 6 hour performance event that evening. And I remember you sitting with Johan at one of the benches and planning out this whole thing. And I just saw you from afar and I was like, okay, there's something really cool going on. And and it was one of the most amazing performance evenings all together. It was really, I think it was even a full moon, and it had this special glow. So I just saw you from afar, and then later I met you during the teachers meeting, and then I think we danced together and we collaborated on different aspects of the festival. And then I got to not only see you, but also feel you as a person. And for me, in my story, we became friends right then and there.
That's so beautiful to hear the details that you recall.
Mm.
I think I remember the mayhem of planning that performance with Johan, which was also a kind of do or die. We didn't know each other, Johan and I. We got paired to curate and plan that. I think it was 8 hours in 3 different spaces and site specifically for that festival. So you know somebody is a good collaborator when you can not know each other and then with kindness and creativity curate 8 hours of performance together.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, Johan. But I think my first clear memory of you is from the teachers' meeting for the contact part of the festival afterwards. And I think one of the warm-ups, I remember witnessing you with curiosity and the warming up. Trying to recall if I remember our first time we talked, but I don't know that it's clear. I remember you coming to watch my class and feeling the clarity with which you were really present and absorbing and curious in witnessing in the space.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
I already mentioned that I am in awe of your dancing. To me, you are in all the years, and I've been in the dance business for a very long time. In all the years, I have rarely met such an incredibly talented, physically, artistically, and humanly developed artist, I have to say. I think one of the sweetest things about you is that you have an incredible physique and incredible facilities, but you also extend yourself to so many different people and to so many different ways of dancing. Often in my professional life as a contemporary dancer, I witnessed a lot of professional dancers who just kind of stayed in their bubble, like it stayed in their theater dance bubble. And one of the things that I really, really appreciate about you is that I witness you to be so open to collaborate and to interact and to dance with everybody, or I don't know if it's everybody, but that there's a huge equality about you sharing your artistry. Is that something that is a conscious decision that you've made sometimes in your life, or is that something that just kind of naturally happens?
Well, thank you for all the compliments. Working to just let them fall into my heart space. Thank you. I think that that's part of who I am. I don't think I'm choosing that, but I would say that now in my life I'm conscious that that's how I orient. Which I would say, particularly through the Feldenkrais training, I think I have more language for this around differentiation and discernment with less judgment. So I think sometimes I say I can be fiercely kind, but also fiercely critical, or kind of discerning. So I do feel this, I think it has to do with me with an interest in alignment between theory and practice.
Could you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, early in my life, I didn't have language towards equity and justice-oriented practices and spaces, but I felt like that's how I wanted to be in the world. And then with knowing more, having more context for, the structures that we exist in and the ways that impact us, our bodies, and ways of being in relationship, that as I feel the clarity of my value system in terms of language, that it matters to me to practice that in embodied and interpersonal ways. And I think that through dancing, you know, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. That's it. You know, there's a lot. I think in some ways we can hide a lot less, particularly through contact improvisation. Um,
Because we have to be so real in a way.
because
Or
I think the avenues for perception are so many and in such close proximity. You know, there's something about, you know, I can't say this with total surety, but I feel like intention can be clearer through touch than it can be through voice.
I would love to hear a little bit, of course, about your story. I know that you grew up in Alaska. I also know that your father is or was a Feldenkrais teacher. I'm wondering how and when in your childhood movement or dance first became present, or the hunger or the passion for movement, how that articulated itself. And if you have, I sometimes make really complex questions, I just tell you right away, or multi questions and like multi-layered questions. So if you kind of feel back into your childhood, if there was like a first recognition of dance that was going to be your path.
Not in a direct way, but yeah, I grew up in Alaska outside of a small town called Homer in the wilderness. And I was basically unschooled, which I think relative to who I am as a dancer, the biggest impact, well, the two biggest impacts are that I had very few limitations for a long time on what I could and couldn't do with my body. And so, and I spent a lot of time outside in the wilderness, climbing trees and scrambling through canyons and being in the mud and like uninhibited play and physical inquiry. And that wasn't, I never framed that as dancing, but I do feel more and more that actually formatively impacted my desire for like kind of physicality that you can like get your teeth into, and also high risk.
If I imagine you in those woods and in those canyons, were you alone, or were you with your siblings or friends? Never.
Never alone. Never alone. In a pack.
Always in a pack. What, your siblings or friends or?
My older sister and friends. It was a you know, before my dad was a Feldenkrais practitioner, he was a commercial fisherman. And so there was a kind of seasonal, nomadic lifestyle where the partners, mostly women of people who fished, mostly men, and the kids would be kind of, you know, everybody lived in their own homes, but there was a way of being implicated in community, yeah, which also feels related to how I value being with others, for sure.
In a pack.
In a pack.
In a pack. Lends itself very organically to contact improvisation communities.
Totally. In a pack. So yeah, I think that the nurturing of the hunger to be physically challenged and in a relationship with environment and you know, shifting landscapes and orientations and that kind of thing. And then I did a little bit of creative movement. My mom always wanted my mom studied visual art in college, and she had always wanted to dance but never had the opportunity. So there was a lot of creativity in my family, but never the idea of like studying dance, like end up in a formal way. That was really accidental.
How did that happen?
in my life. When I was 16, I had been doing community theater. This was my family moved to Montana when I was 11, and so I'd been doing theater, and the community theater burnt down, and which was really tragic. And I mean, it was rebuilt, but there was this gap. There was this kind of opening, which I think of Nancy's gap, the gap of momentary absence of reference. And I decided to take a jazz class at a studio as a kind of alternate thing to do. And they required that you also take a ballet class in order to take a jazz class. And then within 3 months, I was taking classes 5 to 6 days a week. But it still was, it took me a long time to really commit to dance. It took me a long time.
Really? Because you had so many other interests, or what took you? It's interesting because I would imagine you being so committed to dance now. I feel like you are one of the few people that I know that is committed on so many different levels. You're a teacher, you're a performer, you both teach at international festivals and institutions, but you also work on a university level. I mean, dance, if I can say that, I feel like dance is your life. There are so many aspects of it that I feel like that you're so deeply committed to, and it's interesting to hear that it took you a while to fully step into that path also. Why do you think that was? Or were there so many other interesting things around you? Or
there were a lot of other interesting things that I think that it took me a while to be exposed to an orientation to dance that could include everything I love and care about. And so part of it was getting out of a restricted context for dance. Because that training that I did in high school, I have a very complex relationship with it now. I'm able to hold appreciation for certain things, and then I'm very critical about other things. But I was trying to stuff my body into a form that my body was not, that actually didn't include me. I know this is public, but my teacher said to me, it brings up, it feels so gross. She said one day, "Oh, gosh, I really wish I'd gotten you earlier. I really could have made a dancer out of you."
And
that, which in some ways is true relative to that form. Like there was no way I was going to be a professional ballet dancer, but I tried. It's kind of like, a Capricorn. So an astrologer told me not so long ago, mountain goats, they just look silly on the flat ground. They're built to be on the inside.
They need the steep rise.
So I was like, I can do this ballet thing. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I can do it, even though I'm, I was never very good at it, but I worked really hard.
Well, it also sounds that it was in huge contrast to your early childhood, or your base, basically, of rummaging the woods and the forest and climbing trees, and all the freedom that you enjoyed also through your upbringing seems to be in stark contrast to such a formal training. And I mean, I recognize that within myself because I've also had it differently, but I also started training at 15 and tried to make up for as much technique as possible, because usually as a professional dancer you're expected to start when you're like 5 or 6 on a technical level. But for me also there was always this sort of innate organic way of moving that I also didn't want to lose, and it's kind of this double bind between training to find shape and form, and in some ways also to fit a choreographic model, or to fit into the profession also in a way, and then at the same time to have your innate quality of moving. Did you ever reconcile those two parts within yourself? Do you feel like there's a place for you in dance now where you feel really free with both aspects of that?
Well, contact improvisation.
Oh.
It brings us full circle. I will also say that I love your question, and interesting that we have that. I didn't realize that we have that shared kind of timeline of needing more for formal training. I will just say, as a kind of prelude to contact improvisation, that I think I also really, this part of me that cares about deeply, not from an outside-in place, but an inside-out place, about justice-oriented work. I wasn't feeling that within the context for dance that I'd been exposed to, and so that was a big question, like, what is my life work? And I don't understand how that could happen through dance in a way that feels real. So that was a big question. And then I also had some, I don't know how, I don't quite know how this happened, but I ended up with a bit of an idea that, dance was not intellectually rigorous. I guess I do, because the context that I was in was really physically challenging and about perfection of form. But there wasn't a kind of intellectual chops that I was really desiring, and so I wanted to, be in broader discourse with historical and cultural and social contexts and realities that inform who we are and why we are and what we're becoming in relationships. And so I think that that's part of why it took me more time. But yeah, I met contact improvisation when I was 19 at the University of Montana, and so I feel so fortunate. My first teacher was Nicole Bradley Browning, who was really young. She was 26 and got hired at the university as new faculty. And I had no idea. I'd never heard the words contact improvisation. I had no idea what I was getting into, but it was the first time that I felt in a dance form that there was space for me, like the me. And I think that then there's something that makes sense. Oh gosh, I can't remember this author's name. I'll have to look it up and I'll get back to you. But there's an author who writes about when we want something to make sense, we often actually want it to be sensed.
To be sensed.
To be sensed. We use the language, I want it to make sense.
Yeah.
Like I want to understand that, but actually what's happening inside of that is a desire for it to be sensed. And even though, I'm 38, so that was half my life ago, it's such a clear, there's such clarity of how that form met me.
It's really exciting. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, this quote from Nancy that I love. What is it in a shape that gives it form? And if you take the shape without what gives it shape, what do you have?
Can you say it again?
I hope I'm getting it right. I've read it so many times because I love it. But Nancy Stark-Smith, for people who aren't familiar, what is it in a shape that gives it form? And if you take the shape without what gives it shape, what do you have?
I would like to venture a little bit into collaboration. Yeah. And we can still stay connected to the topic of contact improvisation because it's such a true collaborative form. We need at least one other person to do this form with. So in a way, we have to collaborate. Contact improvisation is celebrating its 50th anniversary. It's from when it officially started. I think there's many different pre-contact phases. At least Nita talks about that, and I think some of the founders also mentioned that, but it clearly was defined as the start in 1972. If we talk about collaborating, whether it is in a formal context of performance or in creating anything that you're creating, I mean, you're teaching also. I feel like teaching is also a collaborative form if we take it seriously, actually, if we don't just look at it as standing in front of a body of students and lecturing. But if we're teaching, then we're also collaborating. What are the skills that you feel are needed for a good collaboration? And if you have a favorite memory of collaborative moments in your life, or a collaborative moment, I'd love to hear it.
That's such a big question, Sabine. It's juicy and it's big. Well, I guess for the first time, I'm thinking of what I said about being raised in a pack in the woods. And there's something that's fundamental about being with others for survival. It was not so long ago that I learned that collaboration is, they just recently added collaboration as an official survival response. You have like fight, flight, freeze, collapse, collaboration. And that collaboration is the least considered, most often, most successful survival response historically when you look back through history. So that felt affirming. Collaboration for survival. And I hesitate to have. I feel like I want to insist that the answer to this is complex, because I think that we are the material of the work. So there is something consistent about who I am in different collaborative constellations. But it's not the same. So I don't know, like, how can there be consistency without sameness in terms of how the me meets the we? I love that you frame teaching as collaboration, and I feel like yes, 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 which is multi-directional ways of being in things. Like, it's not just going like that. Like that. But I would say it feels like foundationally, love is the biggest. Love is the biggest thing. Which sounds cheesy, but I think it's real, because collaboration is hard.
Yeah. And I mean, if we're talking about love in any sort of context, if it's relationship or love for an art form or love for a community, even, I think it is not without a skill or skill set that is needed to keep a relationship alive and active and communicative and flowing. So if we're talking about the skills that you think that are required, what do we need? What do you need, or what is it that what's the context that you collaborate? Like, what's the context that you need in order to feel that you can collaborate well?
I mean, again, it's kind of cheesy, but I think I borrowed from Karen Schaffman and Eric Geiger this language of love and trust. If you have love and trust, then a lot of things are possible. And then what does it take to build love and trust with people? Who do you really have love and trust with? And then if you have love and trust, then you can navigate difficult terrain. You can navigate the mountain. Then other things like being able to show up over time. It feels hooked in, but being able to show up over time, fortitude, compromise, reversibility, recognizing that people have different strengths and how you can hook them in together to make something that might seem impossible possible, instead of necessarily like having the same skills, like having my skills meet your skills. So that feels like it's related to curiosity and inquiry. Like, am I deeply curious about you in a way that makes us more compelling?
Do you have a specific example of a collaborative situation where you needed fortitude and some of these, like you said, fortitude, and I think I would add endurance maybe, and the love and the curiosity?
Yeah, I have several. I mean, I think I've been collaborators with Karen Schaffman for 10 years in both choreographic dance making contexts that we're making together, also performing for other people, also pedagogically through working at the university together, and then curatorially. So we actually have a lot of different, in terms of producing and curating. And, you know, I think with her, there's a certain kind of alchemy. We're really different, that we bring, the skill sets we bring together kind of hook in a way that feels like, oh yeah, that now as a team, we can tackle projects that are much bigger than what we could do alone. And we're currently co-curating a 50th anniversary event for contact improvisation here at CU Boulder in the spring and March, as a celebration and a reckoning of the form. And I think with her, the biggest thing that we do is we listen to each other, and we always stay in the conversation. Like, the conversation we're not looking for closure before it's ready. It's like, it's sprawling in a way that feels like it invites the bigness of capacity. So it requires a lot of patience and fortitude and time, the time-based practice.
Sounds like a beautiful dance.
It is, yeah, it's like a big sprawling contact dance. It also involves a lot of computer time and emails.
Yeah, but if you're talking about these skills, I mean, it's listening and giving time and letting things sort of develop on its own, or giving it space. You know, I mean, those are all skills that we also use in contact, or we cultivate in our practice.
Definitely. No, definitely. I think, you know, and that's where I get excited about, again, this alignment. Like, I'm not usually so interested in contact improvisation as a metaphor, but I do really think it's a way to practice the skills, the real skills that I want to have available in my life and in my work. And it asks me to show up in the practice of that in a way that keeps me humble. I'm like, oh shit, I can't. There I am making some assumptions, which then reduces my capacity to be with the complexity of what is. So how can I refresh that? I would say choreographically, I had, you know, 2013. I think you've seen video of this work, but I made a duet with Eric Geiger called "Fingertips Toward Floor, Head Follows," or "The Lazy Sexy Peep Show." And we developed a practice. Actually, you did, because the first class that you saw me teach was based on the research that came from that choreographic work, which we call intelligent recklessness, which is a really high risk, high impact, soft collision, disorientation practice. And there was a way of being in that. We were practicing it together before we knew what it was. We couldn't name it for a long time because it was arising out of practice. And we were practicing in a context with a group of improvisers, but every time we ended up in this high risk, high stakes, contact-oriented dance, everybody else was kind of like to the side. And there was people were like, I'm curious, but I just can't, there's no way I could get into that. And over time of practicing, we realized that the only way it was possible to do it without injury was if we did not worry about the other person, which I think is different than a lot of like ways that care can happen, or like care or concern or safety even in context. That's like, do I trust you enough that I know that you are with you so that I can be with me? Because if we are worried about the other person, it creates this little time gap where somebody could get hurt, actually, because there's a lag there. And there's
I'm
something.
I'm imagining it in my head right now. I've not met Eric in person, but I've seen him dance, and I've seen
Yeah.
you dance many times, and I'm imagining it in my head. Yeah, for me, it sounds like a very high skill level where you get to a place of abandonment also, and such a high level of trust with each other that you fully dare to be yourself. I think a lot of it has to do with like I am giving myself so much to this moment that I'm also not concerned about your safety, that I'm so much in the trust that you know how to take care of yourself with the full me,
Yeah.
with all of me, and all of
Yeah.
me not fully also abandoning myself to time and space and momentum and risk, and there's a lovely intimacy that I find that emerges out of that. I teach a workshop that's called Radically Intimate, and part of that I also work with the intimacy of risk. And I see you
Mm-hmm.
taking that when you dance. I see you going into that, and it. I don't know if you would agree with me on that. That there's an intimacy to that high level of risk.
Oh,
Or
definitely. I mean, I think I maybe said this to you at once, but I was trying to make sense of I was trying to sense the spectrum of my research interests, which was like, on the one hand, I'm like wild, abandon, high athleticism. On the other end, like, Feldenkrais oriented, nuance, detail, subtlety, quietness. Like, how do those live on, like what's going on here? And then instead of making it a line, I bent it made it a circle so they could touch. And then I'm like, oh, as soon as they can touch, then I can feel more clearly how they're woven together. Actually, one needs the other in order to find sustainability. And that feels important because I love my body. I want to dance until I die. And that particularly that you know, high stakes, high risk, endurance oriented work is not sustainable if it's not supported from something, which is the love, but there's also all the sensing work that supports that.
takes a lot of
Um,
preparation also to get to that. I think that's one part that's often being mistaken when people first come to contact or go to a jam and see people jamming on a very high risk level. There's just sometimes these images of people flying up on shoulders or doing these acrobatic lifts. That is the skill in and of itself. But I think both of us, we know that it takes so much more preparation, both on an anatomical, physiological level and on a skill level in terms of communication, that often it's exactly those tiny little alignment pieces that are needed, or even just the musculature that needs to build closest to the bone in order to support yourself up in the air or to support somebody else. So it's I was talking to some theater improvisers also in another podcast, and I think it's so difficult in a way to communicate also to an audience how much skill there's actually involved in improvisation, any kind of improvisation, but I think especially contact improvisation.
I agree with you. I think the aesthetics of it can be very confusing,
Mm.
and it's the complexity of it is often missed in the aesthetics of it.
Yeah. Anya,
Definitely.
I do want to talk to you about your very clearly uh, your very clear stance on the social aspect or the equality or diversity aspect within dance, within the contact community. You currently hold a position also at the University of Colorado, where I just saw it on the website, where you're also in an department, or I don't know how you would call it, but you're specifically also there to work with these topics around equality, diversity, and social justice. How do you bring that into your work? How do you um, is it something that kind of organically happens within the context of dance, or what is it that you're currently busy with at the university, or what is it that you are working on also yourself in terms of communicating, diversifying, finding new language, communicating with the communities? Where are you at with that? Or can you even describe this social somatics or social point of view?
Another big juicy question that's probably going to have a circuitous answer, but I think I feel like, how can we not? The world is so precarious from every perspective. I mean, COVID is highlighting that in a lot of ways, but my dear new colleague, Niyar Masoa, who's from Ghana, Africa, often talks about, like, if we responded to racism like we responded to the COVID pandemic collectively, then things would be different. But what's happening right now is it's an emergency for some people and it's casual for other people. And that is the reality of the fabric of the world, and that's not just about racial justice. I think, we can look at any ways that people have been marginalized or oppressed, and the ways that creates dominant culture and norms, and then is both impacting us and implicating us through our bodies. So I think, for me, I feel like it feels impossible, but it also feels like the most possible things. Like, where else except through the sites, through the locations of our bodies, might we start to engender change with that, in terms of how we are with ourselves and how we are with one another. And particularly as a white person in this time, I feel like there's a necessity and an inevitability that I'm going to get it wrong. There's a necessity to do it, an inevitability that I'm going to get it wrong, but a way of committing to being in the mess of it, and to also use the complexity of intersectionality, which I feel like is also fundamental to my work, like the intersections, where are the meeting points. How many times already have I done this with my hands in the conversation? But right, like how do these labels that kind of help us try to make sense of one another, or to sense one another, right, like gender, sexual orientation, race, like they can bring us together, or they can separate us, and then how is it that we can kind of track how we're landing in relationship with one another, which is exactly like an improvisational practice. Like, how do I know who's behind me without looking? Right, which is like the same kind of thing as, like, I meet across the street and I want to not get hit by a car, or somebody is in a crisis and something needs to happen. Like, what are the skills that we need in order to start to practice being in relationship with the kind of world that we want to be in, rather than in the world, just the world that is, which is not a way of distancing from where we are, but a way of like embodying a visioning practice. So how I do that, oh my God, I'm changing my strategies all the time. I will say I'm really, really influenced by Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote Emergent Strategies and is also a somatic activist. Like, how do we start to embody the just and liberated worlds that we long for? That's her language. And I do think that, I've been saying recently, like, I really think that if we sweat and or cry together, that it changes something about how we care. And if we really care, then we action in a different way. Like, at the end of the day, I'm going to do I'm going to prioritize what I care about and who I care about. So
do you think, to just make it super, super simple, but do you think the intention to reach out and to create that bridge, do you think that is enough? Or do you think that as somebody in a privileged position, and I would say that anybody who's in a white skin, and I mean, maybe I have to extend here, because I feel like, I grew up in Austria, and I mean, I lived in the States for 10 years, but I've been back here for 20 years. But living in a in a country in a middle Europe, I mean, like in the middle of Europe, like racism is not a topic here. I mean, marginally it is, maybe more for people who are coming from the Middle East or who are, migrations happening or, yeah, but it's not on the same level as it is in the US. And also laws are not on the same level as in the US. I mean, we don't really have affirmative action here. I mean, when I was at Columbia College in school, there were already laws implemented to have a certain percentage of students with different racial backgrounds. And, it is, I think part of it is what is the reality of the life that we live in. And if I'm here in Austria, I am not confronted with the topic. Yeah. And so what can I still do? But, and here is the twist, of course, I'm not confronted to it. But why am I not confronted to it? Because is the form of contact improvisation in and of itself already such a normative form? I mean, I know it's been talked about so many times already that why is contact so wide and heteronormative in a way, or why does it attract so many people that just kind of fit in that in that pattern? And that's not specific to Europe. That's specific, I don't know. I think I hope it's changing in the US. But to come back to my hopefully simple question is on the one hand, here in my community, in the country that I live in, I mean, I teach more in other countries also, but I'm not as confronted with it. But is an intention enough? Or would we also, as dancers, as artists, really have to make a bigger effort to extend an arm or to really form more to invite more inclusion? What do you think?
Oh, I think we need intention is not enough. Intention is not enough. There are tons of well-intentioned people of dominant identities who are causing harm and they don't even know that they are. And I would argue that I love that you can name that you're not confronted. So one of my questions is how can we confront ourselves? How can we insist on confronting ourselves? Because whether it's a room of entirely white people or entirely cisgender people or entirely whatever, if it's a homogenous group, then that group of people is not going to have to. You have to choose to. But
which is a privilege in it of itself. That you have the choice to confront yourself or not. Yeah.
Yeah, and most people don't, and I don't want to say this at all like I am like a holier than thou, I know how to do it and whatever. I just, for whatever reason, I care deeply about implicating myself into the mess of it, because that's what the real world is, and I've been thinking a lot and orienting toward what are the things or the context that I'm in that feel aspirational, right? Like it's happening at the university right now. There's all these statements around anti-racist work and decolonizing work, and things are a mess. Not in a way that's more than anywhere else, but it's we have this language that's saying one thing, and then in practice, everybody's kind of bumping along trying to figure out how to. Not everybody. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to be in it and do better, and that's just a messier proposal than the language that we would like to have describe what we're doing.
But I think it's time to learn how to live in the mess. I think
that's the time that we're in right now. Listening and learning from people like Resma Menachem. I don't know if you're familiar with him, Sabine, but he wrote a book called My Grandmother's Hands that's about racialized bodies and embodied trauma. From a somatic perspective, he's a social worker and a somatic practitioner. And he's not the only one. There are also indigenous thinkers and activists who are saying, like, even if we really do the work, it's going to take something like 7 to 9 generations. Like, we're not going to see it in our lifetime in a way that feels like it's satisfying. But how could that, how could actually that longer arc of the volume of time give us more courage and encouragement to show up for the work, as though our lives really depend on it, because ultimately all of our lives actually depend on it, even white people, right, or even straight people, or people who have enjoyed a lot of privilege, because the conditions of the world are changing, right? I think COVID, sorry, there's a leaf blower outside. COVID has forced us into isolation in a way that I think reveals the precarity that's been there for a long time.
Yeah. I would like to just share my authentic movement teacher, Tina Stromstedt, who is a Jungian analyst. She once said that I think the hardest time that we have living in a culture that we live in, which is so goal-oriented or patriarchal also in a way, in its way, or capitalist in a way of efficiency and goal orientation or profit oriented, is that we have a really, really hard time with process. We have a really, really hard time with the chaos, the nourishing in between times, the times where we don't know what's going to happen, the times where a woman, the baby is growing inside a gestation. Is that the right word? Gestation periods. Yeah, where you don't see what is going on. And we need both. We need both in this life. And it's a little, on a Jungian perspective, it is the feminine. It's not, the female, but it's the feminine quality of holding space and or receptivity also, or just space in and of itself. Yeah. And I think part of the biggest issues in our times, and I think if we begin to wrap up our session, also maybe one of the biggest gifts also from improvisation in general, or also contact improvisation, is that we practice. We are not always successful. It's not about being successful, but we practice being in the space of unknown, being in the space of letting things unfold. I think you also, in one of your writings, you call it deprioritizing. Deprioritizing goal-orientedness, or deprioritizing in general, in order to let things emerge, or the priority itself emerge, and which again brings us back to listening.
Exactly. Yeah, this question came up for me a few years ago that I can't let go of. How can we practice deprioritizing in order to allow the conditions to reveal the priority? And that's a practice. I'm messing it up all the time. But I will just say, as a few kind of concrete markers, I consider contact improvisation to be a fundamentally queer form. I can see why it has attracted a kind of hetero dominance, and that some binary gender roles play out in some pretty egregious ways. But to me, the form itself is really queer.
Could you describe it?
Yeah, it's multiplicitous. It's asking for a constant reorientation. It's working with spherical body and spherical space. There's no, there's the insistence of gravity in the direction of down, but then there's the body is so reorientable, and must be in order to actually be practicing the form, with a sense that, like, we could go in more than one direction. At any moment, can we go in more than one direction? A kind of readiness to not be linear, to not be singular, and that there's this, this space between what's real and what's imagined. Like, okay, how proprioceptively do I know where your foot is when I can't see it, which my survival and your survival depend on? That seems impossible, and yet here we are practicing that. And so then somehow we become like a four-legged creature that's flying and spilling through this space, which is defying of so many norms. And then I wonder what people are, what kinds of restrictions in terms of perception people are putting on even while they're practicing the form, in order to, because of homophobia, because of white privilege, because of patriarchy, because of all these things, right? Then we can kind of like make the form this box. But like, again, like Nancy said, like, what is it in the form that, how can you ride a dance for 3 hours with somebody you've never met, you don't speak the same language and you don't know their name, and yet here we are kind of like riding space together. That's like some kind of intergalactic queer fantasy. I think. And I know we're over time, but I do want to say that one of the biggest, like, I spent 10 years living in San Diego in Southern California, and I had the opportunity to work with a really extraordinary student population at California State University, San Marcos, a program started by Karen Schaffman, of diverse young people in all ways, socioeconomically, racially, a lot of first in their family to go to college, first generation American, queer and trans students, like just like human cornucopia of people. And to teach contact improvisation there, it was a real question for me, like how this form that was started, by white people in a really intense social political time in the United States in the 70s, right? Like charged by that, but it came through certain bodies. But even from that, Steve was pulling from so many martial sensibilities, and how does that relate to some of these other threads we've been talking about, in terms of Aikido and Tai Chi as underpinnings. So anyway, this question of like, is this form relevant now in this time in the world with these people in this space, as a real question through my teaching. And I was just blown away by what these young people did with and through the form, individually in terms of development of physical skill, but also in terms of community and intimacy and risk-taking and the politics of like, how does, what is touch like when we're really in a racially diverse space? What are the complexities of that? Or, what is that like for a trans body? And I don't know that experience because I am cisgender, but to hold space with, to be in community with people who are navigating the real complexities of their bodies and their lives. And I feel like, this is what the form was born to do. It just somehow has been truncated by getting stuck in these very privileged white spaces. So I don't say that in a proselytizing way, like, everybody needs contact improvisation, but
holds a lot of space.
It can. I think it depends on, how it's offered and who it's offered through. And that takes a lot of untangling and a lot of, I think, labor and love. So we're back to love.
Oh, what a good way to wrap up our podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for wandering with me.
I do have to publicly announce here that it looks very good that Anya and I will be co-teaching this summer, hopefully. But I can publicly announce here that I do love you.
I love you too, Sabine. I know we're really at time, but I do want to say that you, meeting you and then having you invite me to your festival at that particular time in my life, you gave me a lot of encouragement to have more courage. So thank you for that and for being a fierce supporter of my work and my being, and particularly in supporting my work coming to Europe. I really don't take that for granted.
Yeah, Anya was You were in the festival 2 times, Contact Festival Austria, and it was an honor to have you there. And you're coming back to Europe, hopefully this summer. I know you're gonna be teaching at the Contact Festival in Hungary, and I will see you there. And hopefully we will co-teach also in Austria together. But just to finish off, I think the love for dancing, I think, is clear, and the love for wildness also is clear to me. It was great to hear your story also about your childhood. I didn't know that about you, but I sense that in you, and it resonates with me on a very deep level. I think this also, as a woman embodying both sweetness, gentleness, and full force, and a recklessness and curiosity for full-on meeting. Yeah, what I always love about dancing with you, but what I love about meeting you in different ways is that it reminds me of my full spectrum. And I know that of myself because I know I've sort of included my wildness for a long time. I'm also getting older, so I'm also negotiating my health with that wildness, or that, injuries kind of creep in and my body changes, but the wildness is actually, it's inside of me, so the part that's changing is how I articulate my wildness. And I've always felt that sisterhood with you on that level just as much as our friendship.
Me too, Sabine. It's really special. And I will just say that I'm in the thick of and the beginning of a very exciting new collaboration with a Berlin-based artist, dear human in my life named Makisig Akin. You'll meet them sometime soon. But we've been working with this question of what can we do together that we cannot do alone. And it's like to really hold space for that question. So I feel like even this conversation, what can we do together that we cannot do alone? And I feel that with you. I'm excited to continue to be in with you and always.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, Anya.
Bye.
If you would like to know more about holistic dance and the Holistic Dance Institute, please visit us at our website www.holistic-dance.at. Holistic dance is an invitation to transformation through dance, movement, and touch. It was founded by me, Sabine Parzer, in 2010. It is a mix of different methods, a dynamic cross-method approach from dance pedagogical, dance and body therapeutic, systemic and holistic methods. We offer authentic movement, integrative contact improvisation, somatics and applied anatomy, improvisation, ecosomatics, and many more elements. I offer holistic dance workshops, I offer single sessions, I offer teachers trainings, embodiment trainings, advanced teachers tracks, year groups, and retreats. I would be very happy to see you at one of our events. And if you have any questions, please write me an email.